Welcome to the hidden corners where truth and terror collide. Discover a realm where the lines between the living and the supernatural blur as you embark on a journey to the paranormal and visit the mysterious hidden corners of your mind.
The Wolfman Chronicles, Book 6, Episode 71 now, Chapter 7, A Werewolf in Sheep'S Clothing. And we're in Achill Island, Ireland. The storm had broken overnight, leaving the morning air crisp, but heavy with the scent of rain-soaked earth. Jack stood outside Malachi's small stone cottage on the bluff outside of Kiel. The sea crashing in the distance as the gulls cried overhead. Jack rapped on the door with his knuckles, the sound echoing through the misty morning air, and for a moment there was nothing but silence. Then the creak of floorboards inside was followed by the door opening a crack, revealing Malachi's weathered face. His eyes, sharp and blue as the Atlantic, narrowed at the sight of Jack. "I was afraid you'd be back," the old man said with his gruff Irish accent. Jack shot him a mocking glance. "I told you I'd be right back after the new year." "Aye, but I was hoping you'd forget." A crooked grin escaped Malachi's mouth as he opened the door and ushered Jack in. "I don't get many visitors out here, you know." "Well, if you remember, we have some urgent business to attend to," Jack reminded him. "I have not forgotten that," Malachi replied, "but I'd have thought you'd be headed back for your own country by this point. Things are going to get ugly around here, you know." "And that's what I'm here to talk to you about, Malachi," Jack responded to him. "We need to make a plan. You see, I've got all my family here, and Father O'Malley is pulling together a group of his parishioners to help with this fight. But we have to know who we're fighting and what we're up against." At the mention of Father O'Malley's name, Malachi flinched, and his expression hardened. "I've got no interest in anything involving that man," Malachi said curtly. Jack sat in one of Malachi's large, overstuffed chairs. "Listen, I don't know what's happened between the two of you, but whatever it was, it's nothing compared to what's coming. We need as strong a force as we can muster, and Father O'Malley might have some information that could help us." Malachi hesitated. "Go on," he replied. "People are scared, Malachi," Jack continued, "and if what Father O'Malley has uncovered is right, we're not dealing with something we can face alone. Whatever bad blood there is between you two, it's time to put it aside, for the sake of this community." "What makes you think you can trust that old buzzard?" Malachi asked. Now Jack lifted an eye up towards Malachi. "What makes you think we can't?" "Fine," Malachi responded, putting another log on the fire. "And I'll tell you why. Years ago, when O'Malley had just shown up here on this island, eager to take over when the old father had suddenly passed away during the middle of Sunday Mass, he was young and idealistic, thought he could take on anything. But there was an incident just shortly after he arrived that proved how ignorant he was to the ways of this island. There was a family," Malachi continued, his voice tinged with regret. "A mother and her 2 children. They meant the world to me. Well, shortly after he arrived, strange things started happening to them. Voices, shadows, things you wouldn't believe. O'Malley and I disagreed on how to handle it. He wanted to rely on faith and prayer. I took a different approach, one that he didn't approve of." "What approach?" Jack pressed. Malachi's jaw tightened. "I turned to the old ways. The rituals and the charms passed down through generations of my family. Things that my father, my grandfather taught me. Well, it worked, but at too high of a cost." Malachi sat for a moment in silence, as if the words and the memories were just too hard to bear. Finally, he said in a quiet voice that Jack could barely hear, The mother didn't make it. Well, O'Malley blamed me and said I meddled in things I didn't understand. Jack let the silence hang for a moment before speaking. And do you regret it? Malachi's eyes met Jack's, fierce and unyielding. Not for a second. I saved those children, but O'Malley couldn't see that. Now Jack leaned back in his chair, letting the silence stretch before him. What exactly happened, Malachi? What did you do? Malachi set his cup down, rubbed his hands over his face as though trying to wipe away the past. The family lived near the edge of the bog, a place where the veil between worlds is thin. The mother, Mara, started noticing strange things, like a baby's cry in the night, though there was no baby, and objects began moving on their own. The air turned cold, even in midsummer. He paused, his voice dropping lower. At first, Mara thought it was her mind playing tricks on her, but then the children, her little ones, began waking up screaming. They spoke of a shadow in their room, whispering to them, calling their names, and then the littlest one, Anya, stopped speaking altogether. She was only 6 years old. Jack frowned, thinking of the two little ones at home, Kat's children, who had seen the scary woman in the window. What about the church? What did Father O'Malley do? Oh, he did a plenty of praying, he did. He blessed the house, even brought in holy relics. And for a time it seemed to help, but whatever it was, it came back, stronger and more violent. And one night Mara found scratch marks on the walls that spelled out words in a language she didn't understand. After that, she and the children started finding marks on their bodies, scratches and bruises. She begged O'Malley for answers, but he kept saying faith was the answer, and she had to trust in God's will. And you? Asked Jack, noticing the slight shaking of Malachi's hands as the old man picked up his mug. I didn't think faith alone was enough, and neither did Mara, Malachi said bluntly. The old story spoke of entities tied to the land, things that predated Christianity. I turned to what I knew, the rituals that had been handed down through generations of my family. I set runes around the house, carved protective symbols into the wood of her doors and her walls. I used a charm crafted from iron and rowan to repel the dark spirits. And did it work? Malachi exhaled sharply. It did, for a time. It drove the entity out, but it wasn't clean. There was a price. Mara had been the focus of its torment for so long. Her body, her soul was weakened. And when the entity fled, she grew weaker by the day, and, well, she didn't survive. Jack let the weight of the story settle between them. But the children? Aye, they lived, Malachi said firmly, his jaw tightening. They were free from it. My sister-in-law, Fiona, she took them in, raised them as her own, and it hasn't been easy for her either since my brother Finn passed on. Likely you've seen them around. They help Fiona with the cafe when she needs it and take on odd jobs around town. But O'Malley, he couldn't forgive me. Said I meddled in things I didn't understand. Then I'd traded one evil for another evil. He said Mara's death was on my hands. He lifted his hands and he looked at them, as if they were tainted with blood. I did what I had to do. O'Malley didn't have the answers. If I hadn't acted, that thing would have taken the children too, maybe worse. But O'Malley didn't see it that way. He was in love with her, you see, and so was I. Jack nodded sharply, understanding the depth of the rift between the two men. You were both trying to save her in your own way. He leaned forward, his voice was steady. I'm not asking you to forget the past, but whatever this is that we're fighting now, Malachi, it's bigger than the two of you, and if you don't put aside your differences, there might not be anyone left on Achill Island to save. The two men spent the next hour discussing what they knew of the current strange occurrences. The banshee's wail, the thing they saw coming out of the ground at the graveyard, and Father O'Malley's journal with the cryptic warnings. Malachi, Jack questioned. Does O'Malley know about your wolf lineage? That your ancestors were wolf warriors and that you carry the blood? Malachi choked down a chuckle. Didn't you know? The good father has just as much wolf blood in him as you and I do. And who do you think does all that howling you've heard at night? Jack sat back in his chair and he stared at Malachi. Well, I'll be damned. I certainly would never have suspected that. Well, he keeps himself on a pretty tight leash, Malachi winked. O'Malley's a man of faith, Jack. He doesn't embrace the old ways or what came before. But the blood runs through him too, though he does a better job of pretending it doesn't. Spends most of his time denying it, in fact. Jack stared at Malachi and his mind was reeling. Father O'Malley, staunch, unyielding, a holy man of God, shared the same cursed bloodline? The idea seemed impossible. You're serious, Jack said, his voice barely above a whisper. Now you've seen the way he carries himself, haven't you? The way he senses things before anyone else, like he's got a foot in two worlds. That doesn't come from just prayer and faith, Jack. O'Malley spent his life trying to bury it under scripture and sacraments, hoping he would make it go away. But no matter how he preaches, how many blessings he gives, he can't escape what he is. Now Jack looked towards the window. The distant shape of Sleevemore Mountain shrouded in mist. The unease in his chest deepened. This just keeps getting more complicated. With that, Jack rose from the chair and put on his canvas jacket and his raincoat. He needed to walk and let his thoughts settle on this new information. As he shook Malachi's hand, Jack told him, Well, now that I know the truth about Father O'Malley, I guess it's time I told him the truth about myself. O'Malley wants us all to meet at the church on Tuesday at noon to formulate plans. He thinks that whoever is summoning this entity will try again on the next full moon on January the 13th. And that doesn't give us a lot of time. He might be right about that, Malachi commented, but I have my bets on Imbolc, the 1st of February. Oh, it's called St. Brigard's Day now after the Christianization of Europe, but traditionally it's a pagan holiday. And that symbolizes the halfway point between the winter solstice and spring equinox. Look it up. You'll see why I'm betting on that day. Back at the house, Sasha had taken the kids for a walk down to the beach, hoping the salty air and the rhythmic crashing of the waves would ease the restless energy that had settled over them since they had sighted the scary woman in the window. Well, the rain had stopped, leaving behind a misty haze that blurred the horizon where the sky met the sea. The twins, they ran ahead, their laughter echoing over the sand as they chased seagulls and leapt over tide pools. Sasha kept a watchful eye, her thoughts a mix of worry and wonder, the memory of their whispered confession. We saw her. Still sent a chill down her spine. She hadn't pressed them for more, not yet. Children had a way of seeing things adults couldn't see, and the last thing that she wanted was to make them more afraid. Catherine walked along beside her, her arms wrapped around herself as the wind tugged at her hair. Well, they seem better today, she said softly, glancing toward the twins. For now, Sasha replied. Hopefully they'll forget all about it. Catherine nodded, her gaze drifting to the distant cliffs. This place has a way of holding on to its ghosts, doesn't it? Sasha didn't answer, but the weight of Catherine's words settled heavily between them. The beach stretched on, empty and vast, except for a lone figure near the water's edge. At first, Sasha thought it might be a fisherman, but as they drew nearer, she realized that it was an old woman, Her hunched frame was draped in a dark shawl, and she was singing an old Irish tune, very softly, her voice carrying a haunting melody that sent shivers down Sasha's spine. The twins had stopped in their tracks, their eyes wide as they watched the woman. "Come back here," Catherine called, her voice firm but calm. The twins hesitated before running back to her side, their little hands clutching at her coat. "Who is she, Mama?" one of them whispered. Catherine shook her head. "I don't know, but stay close to me. We don't want to disturb her." The woman's song faded as they approached, and she turned slowly to face them. Her face was weathered, her eyes cloudy but piercing. "Good morning," Sasha said. "The song you were singing was beautiful, and we're sorry we disturbed you." The old woman didn't respond, but stared at them with her cloudy eyes. Then slowly she pointed a bony finger towards them, her voice cracked and soft. "You are in grave danger," she whispered, and crossed herself with the Catholic sign of the cross. Then she turned, and she walked into the mist, her figure dissolving like smoke. Catherine put a hand on Sasha's arm, her face pale. "What the heck was that all about?" Sasha shook her head. "I don't know. We've come across so many strange people. I definitely get the feeling that we're not welcome here. Sometimes they seem so friendly, and then all of a sudden, everyone seems to change, and I don't know how quite to describe it. Sometimes we'll be in a pub or a cafe, and everyone will be laughing and talking, and then all of a sudden, everyone just stops and stares at us. It's really uncomfortable. And I don't know if it's because they're suspicious of us because we're not from around here, or if they sense something else about us that scares them or makes them uncomfortable." They walked along the shoreline, letting the kids throw rocks into the ocean while the gulls circled and called overhead, their cries blending with the sounds of the waves. The twins were relentless in their search for just the perfect skipping stone, darting from tide pool to driftwood like tiny explorers. Now Catherine kept a watchful eye on them. The wind was brisk, carrying the scent of salt and seaweed, and it tangled her hair and made her eyes water. "Well, I'm surprised you stayed here," Catherine mused. "Ireland has so many other sights to see and things to do. Why'd you pick Dugort, and what's keeping you from leaving and exploring some other part of Ireland?" she asked as you absently kicked a piece of driftwood. Honestly, I don't know. Jack found the place, and I thought it was romantic and charming when we first got here. We'd watched the movie, The Banshees of Inisherin, and I thought it would be fun to see where it was filmed. But then all these strange things started happening right after we got here. Well, you know how Jack loves to solve a mystery. Now, I'd be happy to leave, but Jack, he wants to see this thing out. "Always the hero," Catherine replied. "That's my brother." Sasha smiled, "and that's one of the reasons that I adore him." A sudden cry of triumph from one of the twins broke the moment. "Look, Mama and Auntie Sasha, we found a treasure." Both the twins were pointing excitedly towards the water. "Look, over there, it's shiny like gold." "Stay here," Sasha said firmly. "Don't try to get it. The water is freezing." Sasha carefully climbed over the rocks and knelt down, the cold water lapping at her coat sleeve as she bent down to pick up that shiny object. "What is it?" the twins called out in unison. It was a small gold disc, tarnished with age but unmistakably old. The markings on its surface were unfamiliar, worn by time, but there was a face on one side and intersecting staffs with herald crests on the other. This is some kind of gold coin," Catherine exclaimed excitedly, rubbing the disc on her pants to dry and shine the gold so she could see the markings better. "Are there more?" she asked. Sasha stepped back over the rocks to where she had found the coin. "I don't see any, but we could move some of these rocks around and see if there are any more." As she splashed one of the rocks to the side, accidentally slipping and submerging her boot in the water, she saw something glimmer. "I think there's another one," she exclaimed excitedly, and began digging with her hands in the soft sand in the indentation of the rock she had just removed. Her arms submerged almost up to her shoulders, soaking her coat sleeves. And though she was shaken from the cold and both feet were now in the water up to her knees, Sasha held up another gold coin. And Catherine laughed. "You're soaked, Sasha. Let's get some dry clothes and see if we can find some rubber boots and come back later. The tide is coming in." As they walked back to the house, Catherine was searching her phone for an identification of the 2 coins that they had found. Sasha's teeth were chattering, but the excitement finding the coins had made her forget all about the old woman's warning. Catherine gasped out loud. "Listen to this," she cried out. "Are we close to Tipperary?" "What?" Sasha laughed. "Tipperary is a good 4 hours from here. It's past Limerick, kind of in the middle of Ireland. Why?" Catherine read a news article on her phone. "Hoard of gold coins found in Tipperary. One of the most significant finds of 17th century gold coins ever discovered in Ireland was found on 14th January 2013, hidden underneath the floorboards of a house on Main Street, Carrick-on-Suir, County Tipperary. 81 gold coins dating from 1664 to 1701 appear to consist mainly of guineas and a small number of half-guineas. Now, the guinea was a British gold coin minted by the Royal Mint between 1663 and 1814. Sasha, the picture of the coin looks exactly like what we just found." Sasha leaned closer, studying the image on Catherine's phone. The article showed several coins arranged neatly on a table, their intricate designs glinting under harsh museum lights. The coins matched the ones now tucked into Sasha's pocket. "God, we've got to see if there's more," Catherine exclaimed. "Wait till we tell the guys." Sasha smiled, trying to push away the unease curling in her chest. She couldn't stop the feeling of foreboding that lingered. Too many strange things had occurred since they'd come to this island, and she couldn't help but feel that they were all somehow connected. The house smelled of cinnamon, warm and inviting. Rosa was in the kitchen, patiently guiding Grizzly and Carl through the delicate art of rolling out dough for cinnamon rolls. The 2 men were more accustomed to wielding tools than rolling pins, and their efforts reflected that. The floor and their clothes were covered in flour. "Gentle, gentle," Rosa chided, laughing as Grizzly pressed the rolling pin down too hard, causing the dough to stick to the counter. Grizzly huffed, wiping his flour-dusted hands on his apron, a sight that made the kids laugh as they ran up to stick their fingers in the dough, licking sugar off their fingers. "We're learning to be pastry chefs," Grizzly grumbled, lifting his rolling pin like a sword. Sasha laughed. "I think you should stick to cutting wood." "You're soaked, Sasha, and dripping water in my kitchen. Out, out," Rosa exclaimed, shooing everyone out of the kitchen, including her 2 helpers. "Go get cleaned up, all of you," she laughed. After putting on dry clothes, Sasha walked to the living room holding the 2 gold coins in her hand. "Well, Jack's not back yet?" she asked, glancing toward Catherine, who was seated on the couch with a steaming mug of tea. "No," she replied, pulling a blanket tighter around her shoulders, "and everyone else left for the mainland to do some shopping." Sasha frowned, putting the coins back in her pocket. "I'd like to wait till everyone is here to show them the coins we found." Catherine nodded at that. "Yeah, we need to go back and see if there are more hidden in those rocks, but I don't want to make a big fuss about it and draw attention to ourselves or that spot. Tomorrow, if the weather is good, let's take the kids back down there to play in the rocks." Sasha agreed. "I know it's strange, but I can't get over the feeling that this is somehow related to all the other weird stuff that's been going on." As Jack drove along the winding road that led along the bluffs, he thought about what Malachi had said, that Father O'Malley was one of them. And if that was true, how many others were there on Achill Island? If O'Malley carried the blood of the wolf, it stood to reason that others could be too. Jack's knuckles gripped the steering wheel as he rounded a particularly sharp bend. Who else knows? Who else is hiding in plain sight? He thought back to the strange encounters that they had all experienced. Those unexplained howls in the night, the strange occurrences in the graveyard, and the way the townsfolk had treated them since they'd arrived. The fog banked against the cliffs along this narrow stretch of road, and Jack slowed down, aware that this part of the road was particularly hazardous this time of year with the rain-slickened asphalt, glistening like oil, and the jagged cliffs to his left disappearing into the churning ocean below. It reminded him of Highway 1 along the northern California coast, beautiful but treacherous in the fog. As he rounded another bend, Jack spotted the faint glow of headlights in the distance, but the car didn't appear to be moving. And as he got closer, he could see that the car was parked at the very edge of the bluff. It wasn't a good place to stop, especially in this weather. He slowed as he approached, rolling down his window slightly to get a better look. And this vehicle was empty. Its doors shut, but the engine still running. A chill ran down Jack's spine. Whoever had been driving was not in the car. Probably just stopped to relieve himself, Jack thought as he glanced around. But what a strange place to do that. One misstep and you'd be right off the edge. Jack could make out the sharp drop to the left of the road, with barely enough room on his shoulder to pull the small car off the road. And to the right, the cliff rose up several more feet. This stretch of road had literally been carved right into the rock. He pulled over as soon as he could find a safe place to do so, leaving his headlights on and turning on his flashing warning lights to alert anyone else who might be traveling along this road. Jack approached the car cautiously, every nerve in his body on edge. Something was wrong. Jack could feel it in his bones. The car was empty, yet running, and there was no place for someone to go. Thoughts raced through Jack's mind, each one more unsettling than the last. If someone had abandoned their car because they'd run out of gas or had car trouble, well, they would have turned off the engine or it wouldn't be running. Had the driver slipped over the edge in the fog and the mist? He scanned the area again, calling out, "Hello," into the fog. He could see no footprints leading away from the car, and the noise of the crashing waves below masked any distant sounds. Jack walked to the edge of the cliff and peered over cautiously, gripping a nearby steel traffic post for balance. The ocean churned violently below, the jagged rocks at the base of the cliff barely visible through the mist. If someone had fallen, there was little chance they'd have survived. Turning back to the car, Jack tried the door. It opened easily, and the interior light flickered on. The faint smell of perfume lingered, along with something metallic, almost like rust. He frowned and he leaned in. A phone sat in the passenger seat, the screen cracked but still on, displaying a half-typed text message. "Help me. Something's wrong." The letters ended, not finishing the final word. Jack's heart thudded in his chest as he scanned the back seat. It was empty, save for a damp jacket and a paper bag with groceries spilling out. A woman's purse sat on the floor behind the driver's seat. "Where are you?" he muttered, stepping back and scanning the incline of the cliff to his right. The rocky face offered no obvious hiding spots, just wet stone and sparse vegetation. He reached inside the woman's purse, searching for her wallet, for some form of identification, before calling it in to the local police guard. The name on the driver's license made his heart skip a beat. The car belonged to Malachi's sister, Faoladh O'Shea.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode, and I hope you'll join us next week for another installment of the Wolfman Chronicles. And until then, have a great week, everyone.